So before we hit record, you made a really interesting point, and you said that women would likely perform better in this context and the contest than men. So why is that?
There's this really interesting thing with the length of races, with running and some other activities that we've seen where the longer the race is, the more the gap between men and women closes, to the point where when it's long enough, women actually often do better. And so, when I think in a 5K, it's like men on average perform 10% better than women. By the time you're getting to 100 miles, that gap has narrowed. By the time you're getting to multi-day races through deserts, women consistently perform better. Interestingly, women also perform better in long distance swims, open water swims, like very long distances. So there's, a temperature regulation component to that. Somehow women seem to be better at regulating temperature during these activities. But some of the theories as to why women do better in these long distances have to do with how women's bodies oxidize fat. So how we, essentially use fat, which is, like I said, the primary fuel when you're walking at that kind of activity level. But then also, women have the capability of being pregnant, and pregnancy is metabolically the single hardest thing a human can do. So someone calculated it's essentially the same as running a marathon every day for the entirety of your pregnancy metabolically. So it's, maybe that's what's driving women in these very long efforts to perform better. But yeah, it would have been interesting to see what happens if we throw a few women in there.
I came across this study where it measured effort in high-intensity interval classes. So basically, your CrossFit type classes. And it found that women, when the coach would say, go your hardest, women would consistently go harder than men. Like they were just more willing to push into the sort of darkness of exercise-induced suffering than the men were, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, and that lines up with some things that I've seen about women having in an exercise setting higher pain tolerance than men. So in some settings, it seems like men have higher pain tolerance than women, but in others, it seems that women very much have higher pain tolerance. So maybe that's how they're able to kind of hang out in that pain cave a little bit longer than men.
Totally. It's like when I get a blister on a walk, it's the end of the world. And my wife just, her sock is bloody and she just hasn't even mentioned it. It's exactly that.
Yeah, man flu is real.
Absolutely. So the competitor who ended up winning this thing, what I thought was interesting is that he had a really sort of positive outlook the entire time. He was trying to keep everyone going. He was always, happy and smiling. How do you think mindset would factor into a competition like this?
Yeah, mindset would be huge. I'm a geneticist, so a lot of times I think about things in terms of genetics and genetic predisposition. But at the end of the day, there have actually been studies that show that what you are told about your genes influences your ability more than your genes. So there was a study where they told people that they were predisposed to be low exercise or have low exercise capacity or something like that. And within a very short time, the way people exercised lived up to that expectation, despite the fact that their genetics didn't actually line up with that. So it seems like, the other side of that, of course, is that if you believe that you have a really high capacity, if you believe you can win, then you're probably a lot more likely to win. And it's really interesting because it's really at the physiological, like even the molecular level, our bodies respond to what our brains are saying.
That's fascinating. Does this sort of line up with the central governor theory at all, which is basically saying that your body sort of your brain puts a limit on your physical output in order to sort of protect yourself so you don't end up going so hard that you injure yourself and burn out of fuel? Is it in that lane or is that something totally different?
Yeah, I would imagine that seems like it lines up really well because, normally it's protective to not push yourself to the brink. But, if you can switch that off, it's kind of like, so I work a lot with divers who hold their breath, free diving. Our brains tell us we need to breathe, not when we actually need to breathe, but when carbon dioxide has built up. And that's also protective because our body's saying like, time to breathe. But what really highly trained freedivers will do is they shut off that signal or they ignore it. They train themselves to ignore the signal that's saying carbon dioxide is high, and then they can hold their breath quite a bit longer. So it becomes much more dangerous at that point, and that's why sometimes people drown. But it does enable them to hold their breath for an extraordinary amount of time.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of it is kind of like a smoke detector, whereas if the smoke detector is going off, it it's sensitive, right? We want the smoke detector to go off when you burn a piece of toast, when you're cooking something and it ignites. Most times there's not an actual fire, i.e. danger, but we want the smoke detector sensitive so the time that there is an actual fire, you're going to react and make sure there's nothing wrong. Is that kind of what we're talking about here?
Yeah. And, a piece of that is that we were also talking about before is that when you're driving yourself that hard, your body has to ignore other parts of its physiology to put the effort into the endurance. So things like your immune system are compromised. So a lot of people after long endurance events like ultras will get sick because their immune system just doesn't have, your body doesn't have the energy to devote all of the resources to everything that needs those resources. So we see a character, a competitor who becomes sick over the course of the race and says, I haven't been sick in 10 years. And it's like, well, yeah, that's not a coincidence. You're putting your body through the ringer. It's putting all of its resources into walking, and it has nothing left for the immune system.
Yeah. I did a long hike through southern Utah. It was like 850 miles. And when I got back, I got sick within like a week. It was just like immediately, You're home. Okay, you're safe. Now we're going to shut you down and get sick.
Yeah, exactly.
In terms of what we were talking about with mindset, have you experienced that when you do some of your endurance stuff, like especially in the mountains in Utah? I saw you posted on Instagram the other day. You were hiking up a mountain. It looked cold. It looked like it was at high elevation and it looked hard.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think, it helps that I just love skiing so much. So it's a lot, I'm in it for that. And that makes it easier to kind of push through. But I'm in my office and it's a few degrees cooler than it normally is. And I'm freezing, but I'm out there and I'm able to push through very cold temperatures. So it's like, yeah, we're very able to change our baselines, as I know you talk about. So it's, I have experienced that and it's amazing what you can do if you decide to push through something.
Do you feel like that there's almost a lesson there for the average person where if you don't like to exercise and you find it too hard, simply changing the environment and finding something that you actually do love can almost act as fuel to kind of get you past the hump?
Oh, absolutely. If you're not excited to get out there, then, if you're tired, you're just not going to do it. Whereas, I could be tired, but right now it's snowing up in the mountains and I'm really excited to go ski tomorrow because it's so much fun. And so I think, whatever it is that you can find that joy. Some days, if I'm feeling really tired after work, I go to spin class, which feels a little silly sometimes because it's kind of like like a dance party on a bike, but it's really fun. And so there are days where that's my inspiration. So I think, finding joy in whatever you do for exercise just makes it so much easier.
Totally. I've experienced that myself in terms of if I'm on a treadmill, it's like, it's so long, it's so boring, the minutes go by so slow. But if I go do a trail run, I'll look down and I've gone 6 miles. And I'm like, oh, I feel great. I'm having a great time. If I was doing 6 miles on a treadmill at mile 2, I'd be like, we need to stop this. This is awful.
Yeah, absolutely. I was on the stairs in the gym the other day and it was like 20 minutes in, I was like, oh no, I can't do this.
What do you think in real life most closely mimics this competition? Of course, without the possibility of being shot at any given moment if you slow down.
Well, as far as I know, there actually are races quite similar to this where it's not so much where they're making you maintain a specific speed, but it's, last man, I think they're even called last man standing or something like that. And you essentially have to go a certain distance every hour or whatever it is. And if you cover that, if you're able to finish that distance in that time period, you are still in the race.
Yeah.
And I think people last quite a while in those. Of course you have, races where there's 200 plus miles that you're covering. But it is interesting, and they mentioned this in the film too, the psychology of not having a finish line is so different because it's not that you have to make it somewhere. It's that you have to outlast everyone else. I can't imagine what it'd be like to compete in something like that.
Absolutely. What do you think the sort of big practical takeaways from this movie are for the average person as it relates to endurance, physiology, mindset?
I would say get good shoes. Don't wear boots when you're going for a 100-mile hike. I think that's, training helps. All of these things are possible. I recently was actually in the mountains in Canada, backcountry skiing for a week with a woman who was 71 years old. And we were doing, 5,200 feet of vert a day. And she was doing that 7 days in a row. And it was just so amazing to me. She was keeping a good pace. It was a steady, it wasn't a particularly fast pace, but 5,200 feet a day for 7 days is really impressive at 71. And so I think it's kind of important to keep in mind that, if you train, if you keep at a good pace, you're capable of a lot more than I think people think they are.
Well, thanks for coming on, Melissa. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.